Hey there. So, hope you're having a good day. Um, I've been doing some thinking. Don't think it's that profound or special, but yeah, I just wanted to share because it might be somewhat helpful or someone might be able to relate. Um, yeah, but I've written a little something and I think I might give it a read and yeah, just see what comes up. Here we go. So, the point of this, in essence, is to say that you are already good enough and that everything else is a lie. That truth is a fiction, that salvation is a myth, and that what is important is that, yeah, you're good enough as you are. That's essentially it. Now, why is that the conclusion that I've got to? So now it's time for us to go on a bit of an intellectual journey, um, which will be boring in some parts, but bear with me. So for me, for most of my life, I've been looking for answers. I don't think that's really unique. Everyone's been looking for answers. But the questions that I wanted to answer, like most people, I think, were questions that we've asked since humans had the ability to ponder anything, right? And this is questions like, who am I? What's the purpose of life? What's the point of anything? Why are things the way they are? What is true and what is real? These are the kind of questions that I would say I've been plagued with for probably around a decade now. And yeah, it seemed that the whole time that I was playing with these, that I was running in circles. And what I've come to now is the idea that the greatest lie that I was told was that these questions have answers. That there is something that I can find. And this is the lie that has been perpetuated by all of psychology and philosophy, religion, spirituality, politics, any kind of systems we have. I was sold the dream that within one of these is some kind of answer that would make sense of existence, something that would tie it all together, something that would finally make me feel good enough or stable enough in who I am, in the mystery of the universe, right? So as a psychologist and as a person, I've spent too many hours investigating systems and theories of human nature to understand where the answer lies. Whether, I could find some thread of knowledge or some sentence somewhere that would explain everything, that I was the one that could find this little hidden bit of something that would tell me who I am and why things are the way they are. And a few times I did feel like I got really close. But then after that period of excitement kind of faded, and I inspected it further and I injected a little bit of humility into the situation, I found that the answers were actually shallow and that they never fully captured what I wanted. And now I think I can say with some level of relative confidence that the search for truth, for me anyway, is and was doomed for failure, and that no final answer exists, right? And this isn't a problem. The problem is not that there is no answer, but this was something that I felt was a problem for so long. I think the real problem is that we're so attached to the questions and so attached to seeking answers. The problem is that our longing for awe and our longing towards the mystery of life has been colonized by our insecurities and by the systems we're in that perpetuate these insecurities, which has led to many people forging an endless search for answers. The difficulty is, as already anxious creatures, we live in systems perpetuating these anxieties that tell us that we aren't good enough, that we don't have enough, that we don't know enough. And that's precisely because it is these beliefs that continue to perpetuate the systems that we're in. And it's because these beliefs and the systems that we have are like band-aids for the deeper wounds, right? We've been misled and taught to continue searching because this is a band-aid for our fundamental anxiety. But the truth is that there is no truth and that the concept of truth might not even really be that important. Alright, so this video is not just about what is true, but it's about what we want to be true and how that longing can and has misled us over time. So to begin, the psychological need for certainty. So a core feature of humans is that we crave clarity. We want stories that tell us who we are, what's wrong, and how to fix that. This is because at our core, we have a fundamental anxiety, like all creatures. Except for us, this anxiety isn't just about an instinctive fight or flight, right? This anxiety is deeper. It's an existential anxiety. It's a burden placed on us, given we are born as, conscious beings with a developed prefrontal cortex that can reflect on ourselves. And we're born into a mysterious world, and we're naked, and we're vulnerable, and we're little creatures in the grand scheme of things. So that in itself is anxiety inducing. And what we do is we create stories because it gives us a sense of stability in what otherwise appears to be an unknown and chaotic cosmos. So in our modern Western world, our systems are one thing that give us convenient stories that make sense of our existence. And systems, when I say that, means anything like religion, science, politics, psychology, and philosophy. They all give us stories to cling to in our mysterious world. And I think it's worth noting as well that these systems aren't only antidotes to anxiety. They aren't only coping mechanisms. I think a nuanced view is required, right? Because there can also be genuine ways of allowing humans to pursue things like meaning, belonging, and beauty. But what I'm considering here is that most of the time our search for answers and the answers that we come up with are actually a defense and are actually coping mechanisms against our fundamental uncertainty, against the basic recognition that life is unstable, unpredictable, and unfixable in any permanent way. These systems aren't truth and aren't reflections of reality or human nature. They are often just unique attempts to provide us with a sense of stability. The problem is, over time, we become attached to the narratives we created and begin treating the narratives as reality, forgetting that what is truly real is just the question, and all that comes after will never be sufficient. So certainty can feel like safety, but often it becomes a kind of trap. Now moving on, we've talked a little bit about the human need for certainty. Let's look at the systems we have and the limitations. So every system that's being created has some kind of purpose and some kind of interesting insight into human nature. But I think what's more important as a recognition is that every system is limited in some way. So what we need to recognize is that among these systems, there is no ultimate truth. Every perspective is one lens among many. And even this perspective on perspectives that I'm giving right now is very limited and very biased. Right? But I think that it's honest somewhat, which is, it's one thing it's got going for it. That's not to say that it's special or unique in any way. I'm definitely not the first person to say these, but this is the way that I've got to this point, right? So for me, there are, like in observation, there are so many religions and spiritualities, psychologies, philosophies, theories claiming to propose some kind of certainty or some kind of understanding, proposing their own version of the world, their own narrative of why things are the way they are and how they should be. But for me, I've tried to be very intellectually rigorous about these things, and I find that the justification, the ultimate justification, is always lacking. Every theory will make an unjustified leap or some kind of assumption or gloss over some contradiction. Now, in saying this, I'm not trying to dismiss the systems entirely, but just to reveal that there is a pattern of overreach and fragility behind claims to absolute truth. So there is a very thin veil of certainty that covers the ultimate unknowingness that is at the core of our being. Now, let's look at a couple of examples. So firstly, in religion, let's take Christianity, right? So Christianity will claim that the Bible is the Word of God and that there are objective ways to exist within the world that are better than other ways. Now, even if we don't account for the variety of religions that would disagree or propose some kind of alternative, within Christianity itself, there's a multiplicity of interpretations about what God is, about what it means to be human, and about who Christ was. There was no certainty that I could find. The more I looked into it, the more questions I had. There are different types of Christians. There are mystics, there are Gnostics, there are conservative priests, there are progressive priests. There are people that treat the Bible as literal. There are those that treat it as a myth. There are those that treat it as allegorical and historical. And I would confidently wager that pretty much each of those people would believe that they are seeing it accurately and that the person who disagrees with them isn't seeing things clearly. So already if I had to choose one of those things to believe in, I feel like I'd just be making some kind of arbitrary choice based on something that wasn't exactly certain or clear. Now let's look at politics. Capitalism, or I guess economics, I don't know, politics is not my main system of knowledge, but capitalism anyway. That is the vision of utopia that we're living in at the moment. It assumes that humans engage in self-interested actions. It assumes that competition drives innovation and growth. It assumes that inequality is natural and even necessary, and that individuals are free to create their own lives. So what happens with that? We end up believing that productivity is a key good in existence, that the accumulation of wealth and material goods is some kind of reflection of how good we are, and that if people are struggling, that it is on them, because everyone within a capitalist system allegedly has the same chance at success, right? It's meant to be fair. Now, if we ask why this is the belief system that we've engaged in, yes, we can point to historical reasons about how useful it was at the time and what it developed out of. But I think a more honest look at it and a psychological look at it is that it's a system we came up with as a convenient way of organizing society, and that now it isn't serving us anymore. We begin to worship productivity, wealth, to treat time as a commodity, and we begin to objectify ourselves. And we take these things as the way it is. Right, when the truth is we don't have to do any of these things. Success isn't accumulation of wealth. Success isn't having a family. Success isn't being happy. Success isn't anything. It's a made-up term. And the system that we live in treats it in a certain way. We don't have to believe in the word success. Right? It's a term and a useful fiction that we've created and attached to. And it says nothing about reality. It says nothing about people the way they are. And it says nothing about what people should pursue. We don't have to take success or striving for more for granted as some kind of reality for being human. It's an assumption about the way people are and about what is good for people. And it's not really grounded in anything that is objective. Now let's move to psychology, right? Psych as a field wants to be treated as an objective science, and CBT is treated as the gold standard for treatment. It's championed as evidence-based and empirically validated. But when we start to look into it closer, there are cracks that begin to show. Right? We're in the middle of a replication crisis where many psychological studies, including CBT outcome research, fail to consistently replicate original results. And then we've got critics such as Jonathan Shedler. He wrote an article in 2018 called "Where is the Evidence?" And he points out that CBT's evidence base is often overstated and that it relies on short-term, symptom-focused measures rather than deeper or lasting transformation. Right? So what we're seeing here is that when we peek behind the veil, there are these limitations that aren't getting acknowledged. Now let's look at the assumptions in CBT. So more than that, it's rooted in a particular philosophical lineage, tracing back to Stoic thought. The belief that our suffering stems not from events themselves, but from our interpretation of them. So in this view, change comes from identifying and correcting distorted thinking. Now, this idea has value. I can't deny that, and it can be empowering in moments of acute distress. But problematically, it also promotes a narrow view and a narrow model of the human psyche, and it reduces much of our pain to faulty thoughts that needs fixing. Now again, this is a limited perspective on what CBT is, but that's essentially what we're taught, and that's essentially what is spread about it. Right? That's what it's about fixing. And the point of this isn't just to rag on CBT, because that seems to be the dominant narrative these days. More people aren't happy with it. I'm not trying to throw the baby out with the bathwater. The point is to acknowledge that this model, as many models do, often neglects other things, whether it be emotion, embodiment, trauma, power, context. It assumes the mind is like a faulty computer that can be reprogrammed, and it misses that humans are truly deeper than that, are relational, social, meaning-seeking, are embedded in history, in culture, and in politics. Places the burden of change on the individual, subtly implying that if you're still suffering, it's because you haven't challenged your thoughts well enough, or you haven't done enough. And in doing so, it risks individualizing collective or systemic pain and pathologizing very human experiences. So these frameworks can help us, but the point here is to show that they can also close off avenues to complexity and nuance, and they're providing a sense of clarity and stability where there is none. They give us stories about who we are as people and what to strive for in our lives, but what they're really doing is reinforcing our anxiety. These are implicitly telling us that we as humans cannot handle our anxiety and cannot handle mystery, and that we are not good enough as we are, and that we have to strive for something in order to have worthwhile lives, or have to change something about ourselves in order to avoid the fear that plagues us. These systems are rarely honest, and they rarely teach us how to sit in the tension and how to sit in the mystery. What happens over time is that because we haven't learned how to sit with the mystery, we forget that the systems are tools and not the truth. And we also forget that the people who invented these systems and these philosophies and therapies and spiritualities were people just like you and me. They weren't heroes, they weren't geniuses, they weren't special. And I suspect they didn't have some kind of special knowledge that we don't. Right? They might know more things. Right? But at the end of the day, they're people who came up with things and who applied them. I don't think there's anything special or objective going on here, and nothing that we need to take for granted. Right, so part 3. Salvation is a lie, and you are already good enough. So let's get into the meat of it. This is like the big conclusion. Okay, so the idea that there is something to be fixed and that there's something to be afraid of, the idea that we're not good enough as we are, this is the true error. We've thought for so long that if we reach some kind of goal, that if we do enough therapy or pray enough or earn enough or achieve enough or understand enough, that we'll finally arrive and finally be whole and finally be safe. This is one of the narratives at the core of all belief systems, and it's unhelpful. The truth is that I don't think we ever arrive anywhere. Right? There's nowhere to arrive. There's just here. There's just the present moment. And life is a constant flux. It's constantly changing. There is no set point to arrive at. The goalposts always move. Right? And another truth is that we can't avoid pain. We can't avoid suffering. We can't avoid grief. Being human is a complex and messy experience, and we're never going to be finished projects, and we'll never have enough of something. The idea that questions have answers, or that some answers are objectively better than others, is where this whole struggle begins. The idea that we can avoid the anxiety of the mystery or avoid suffering. The idea that there's somewhere to get to, something to know, or some kind of state to be in. We've been sold a story that one day, if we do all the right things, we will be safe from doubt, from pain, and from contradiction. But that day never comes. Salvation, the narrative our modern systems are selling us in this sense, is a fantasy rooted in fear. The fear of being incomplete, unworthy, or not enough. We came up with a story that we had to be saved because we didn't know how to sit with our anxiety and how to sit with the mystery. So we projected this into systems that perpetuate the endless pursuit of self-development, knowledge, the accumulation of material objects, and the belief that we are not good enough as we are. These stories and these narratives have turned us into strangers from ourselves. Now, what is the actual truth? What can we actually be certain of? I don't know. Not much, I'd say. My current and limited perspective is that we exist as human beings, and we are some kind of sense-based organism in the universe. Now, that's it. That's not to say that everything is physical, or that everything is material, or that everything is biological. This is just to say that the only thing I can say with any form of confidence is that our ability to know anything is limited by our unique set of qualities as human beings. Now, how can we make claims about the universe when we're human? Everything that we experience is human. Language is human. The way we live is human. The wavelengths that our eyes perceive are human. Now, I don't think this is a pessimistic view, but I think it's an honest one. It's an honest recognition of what we are. And like Nietzsche says, we are human, all too human. All too human. Right? This is not a problem. We are limited, and that's not an issue. We strive for answers when our answers will always be limited. We strive for salvation when salvation isn't necessary. Now, we strive because there is something in our nature that tells us to strive for something. But when we get lost in that striving and that pursuit, we forget that we are already good enough. And not because we've earned it or because we've transcended something, just because we exist. You're here in this strange and mysterious world, and that's more than enough. That's a burden in itself, right? And everything else that comes after that seems to be some kind of construction or some kind of fiction. And I suspect that our lives would be somewhat easier if we acknowledged this reality. You are good enough as you are. You are as you are. You exist. You don't even have to be good. You don't have to be anything. You exist. What happens after that, no one person has any claim above another's to say that their way of life is better or worse in any objective sense. We are all creatures navigating a mystery, and we should have our capacity to live out the lives we have in the way we want. Now, our modern day systems seem to allow that because we live in very advanced times where a lot is accessible and achievable. But the tragic irony is that these systems are the least conducive to individual flourishing that we can have. In the West, we're worshipping productivity. Wealth is a new religion. Insecurity is the new core belief. There's not much that we can do with that. The fictions that became systems are now treated as reality, and we've lost our way. If there even is a way, we're just lost. But we're pretending we're not. I don't know how we should live our lives. All I can sense and all I can feel is that the only thing that feels meaningful is some form of honesty or humility. And I think this comes in two parts. The first is acknowledging that we don't know and can't know much about the mysteries of existence. And secondly, to learn how to sit with that anxiety, to process it, to embrace it, not to shy away from it. The anxiety is human. And like Fred Rogers says, anything human is mentionable, and anything mentionable is manageable. It is manageable. It's not a problem. We don't need to be scared of our anxiety. Now, even my perspective that I'm giving here is limited. It's limited by my biology, my upbringing, my parents, my friends, my personality, the information I've consumed, the implicit messages I've taken on, the capitalist system I'm in, and the Western ideals that I've been raised with. All I can say is that this is all I can say. All I'm having is this one particular experience as this one particular person in this one particular human shell in this one particular system. But then again, maybe if I was raised in some kind of indigenous community where my existence was much more communal, much more relational, much more connected to nature, then I wouldn't be promoting things like honesty or authenticity or a lack of objectivity. I'd be promoting something else. I'd be living a whole different way. My mind would be wired in a different way. So take even what I say with a grain of salt. I'm not right or wrong. It's just an observation. And I hope that it at least is somewhat interesting and that maybe it can help you come to your own conclusions. Now, lastly, existential humility as a way forward. So, I go back to the beginning of this video and to myself when I was 15 years old. The questions I had were questions that have been asked since humans began to wonder and ponder. Questions like, who am I? What's the purpose of life? What's the point of anything? You know how it is. Now, I went through many different answers and now believe that there is no true answer. There are only questions which are natural. Right, so there are questions and there's a question up, but there's no sufficient answer that we can find. And that's okay. But even in saying that, I wonder perhaps whether it's even the questions that are misguided. Like, why do things need a point? Why do we need an explanation? Why do I need to be anything more than a mysterious creature? Do I only ask these questions because of the traditions that I've been brought up in? These questions are asked, but does that say anything about us as humans deep down, or does that just say more about the particular humans that I've learnt about? Just seems like I exist and all else is a form of poetry, attempts to capture reality with our limited abilities. And I'm not saying that we should give up and that we shouldn't explore anything or research anything or investigate anything. I guess I'm just hoping that we can put a little bit of humility into these things, because that's, I think, the only way that we can refrain from having our fictions and illusions turn into false realities. Now, as humans, I can't deny that we have needs. Physical needs, emotional needs, psychological needs, and I don't know exactly what these are. I can't map these. But I know that we all have different ways of meeting these needs, and that these change over time, and they change between cultures and between different eras of history. What I can be pretty sure of, though, is that salvation is not a need. Being fixed is not a need, and certainty is not a need. I think they come further down the line, and that the true need fundamentally is the ability to look at the mystery before us, which is awe-inspiring and anxiety-inducing, and to sit with that without a need for an answer, perhaps without a need for a question. To ground ourselves in a place where we are present and courageous and fully aware of our limitations and capabilities. That's a more honest approach to existence, and one which I think better allows people to take some pressure off themselves and to make the most of their time on Earth. or at the very least, it works for me. So to summarize, lean into the mystery. Don't get attached to answers. Learn to live the questions. Be human and be yourself. You don't have to be anyone or do anything that you don't want to, ultimately. And as Lil Nas X said, if you aren't yourself, the people who are looking for you, the real you, will never find you. So yeah, that's my thoughts. That was long, but if you made it to the end, thanks for your time. Had fun yapping, and yeah, be well. I'll be seeing you.